The entire operating theater fell silent when my voice trembled. I was presenting a critical case, but my stammer betrayed me again. The senior surgeon, Dr. Wallace, smirked in front of everyone and said, "If you cannot even speak properly, how can you save a life?" Laughter followed. I felt my chest tighten as the humiliation burned through me. That day, I vowed I would never let my voice define my worth. Months later, fate brought an unexpected call. The health minister needed an urgent cardiac surgery, and he had one condition. He wanted me to perform it. Before we continue, remember this: hospitals hold secrets that never make the charts. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to Emergency Fables, and uncover the stories hidden behind white coats, whispered apologies, and karma that always finds its way. Now let's begin. My name is Dr. Ethan Cole. I am 34 years old, and I work as a cardiothoracic surgeon at St. Patrick's Medical Center in Boston. The hospital stands tall like a cathedral of medicine, its glass facade reflecting the restless sky above. Inside, everything smells of disinfectant, metal, and quiet desperation. I often say hospitals are places where science and faith shake hands every single day. But behind those white walls and polished halls, there are stories of pride, ego, kindness, and redemption. I have lived all of them. I have been working at St. Patrick's for nearly 6 years. When I first joined, I was not anyone special. I was one of those doctors who kept their heads down, spoke less, and worked hard. My stammer often made it difficult for me to express myself clearly, so I preferred silence over small talk. Some people thought I was arrogant or reserved, but the truth was simpler. I had been mocked enough in my life to know that silence was safer. My parents raised me in a small town outside of Portland. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked in a community clinic as a nurse. She was the one who taught me compassion, patience, and the strength that hides in kindness. I remember how she would return home after long shifts, her uniform smelling faintly of antiseptic and baby powder, and still find time to help me with my studies. She told me that a doctor's heart should be bigger than his ego. I carried that advice into every decision I made. But the medical world, especially surgery, is not kind to softness. It is a battlefield of skill, intellect, and precision. Confidence is your armor, and any weakness, especially one that can be heard in your voice, is ammunition for others. My stammer began in childhood. It was mild, manageable, but when I felt nervous or emotional, it worsened. During medical school, I had managed to keep it mostly under control. But in the high-pressure world of surgery, where seconds count and commands must be crisp, it became my biggest enemy. At St. Patrick's, I worked under the department head, Dr. Alan Wallace, a man who was both brilliant and brutal. He was in his late 50s, tall, silver-haired, with eyes as cold as surgical steel. Patients adored him for his confidence. Colleagues feared him for the same reason. His words could slice deeper than any scalpel. There was also Dr. Mia Henderson, the senior anesthesiologist, calm and wise, who often encouraged me quietly. She once told me, "Ethan, people remember how you made them feel more than how you spoke. You will be fine." Her words were like gentle sutures over an open wound. Among the residents, Dr. Chris Palmer, my closest friend, was the opposite of me. He was outgoing, loud, and charismatic. Where I hesitated, he jumped, yet he always had my back. "You do not need to talk fast to prove yourself," he would joke. "You let your hands do the talking." Before the conflict, life at St. Patrick's followed a rhythm I had grown used to. My days began at dawn. The hospital cafeteria's coffee was bitter, but it was the taste of duty. Mornings were filled with rounds, moving from patient to patient, checking vitals, listening to murmurs, adjusting drips, and explaining procedures. I always took extra time with patients. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be nervous, to have your voice fail you. Some patients noticed my stammer, but instead of judging, they often smiled. One elderly man once said, "Doc, I stammer too when I am scared, but you are brave enough to talk while cutting hearts open. That is something." Those small moments mattered more to me than any praise from colleagues. But not everyone saw me kindly. Dr. Wallace had always been skeptical about my presence in his team. To him, perfection was not an ideal. It was the baseline. Anything less was weakness. He had built his reputation through decades of flawless surgeries, national awards, and media attention. He often gave talks at medical conferences, where he was introduced as the surgeon who never failed. He believed that appearance, composure, and authority were as important as skill. And in his eyes, I lacked all three. During meetings, he would often cut me off when I tried to speak. "Dr. Cole, we do not have all day," he would say with a forced smile, while others shifted awkwardly. My heart would pound in those moments, my throat tightening as words tangled inside me. Every time it happened, I promised myself that next time, I would speak better. Outside work, my life was quiet. I lived alone in a small apartment overlooking the Charles River. My evenings were spent reviewing medical journals, sometimes watching the water shimmer under the city lights. I did not have much of a social life. I had dated once or twice, but my work hours, along with my self-consciousness about my speech, made relationships difficult. Still, I found peace in my purpose. Every successful surgery reminded me that my value was in what I did, not in how I spoke. But that illusion began to crack one morning during a case presentation. It was a routine departmental meeting. Surgeons, residents, and interns gathered in the conference room. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above. I had prepared a detailed case report on a complex congenital heart defect. I knew my data inside out. But when I stood before them, pointer in hand, and began to speak, my throat tightened. The patient presents with, the word would not come out. My palms turned cold, a few heads tilted. Dr. Wallace leaned back, lips curling. "Take your time, Dr. Cole," he said with the kind of patience that was not patience at all. I tried again. "The patient presents with tetralogy of Fallot." A snicker came from the back. Someone coughed to hide it. I could feel my ears burning. My mind screamed, "Focus on the content, not the words." But my tongue refused to obey. When I finally finished, the silence was thick. Dr. Wallace stood up, slow and deliberate. He walked to the front, looked at the slides, then turned to me. "Impressive case," he said, "but you should consider letting someone else present next time. A doctor's voice should inspire confidence, not hesitation." There was laughter, restrained, professional, but laughter nonetheless. I remember standing there, feeling the world tilt slightly. I smiled weakly, nodded, and sat down. Chris gave me a sympathetic glance. Mia looked angry, but she said nothing. That was the moment something broke inside me. After the meeting, I went to the hospital rooftop, my place of quiet retreat. The wind was cold, the city below busy with lives that did not care about mine. I gripped the railing and let the humiliation wash over me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My entire life had been about proving that my voice did not define me. Yet here I was, being judged precisely for it. That night, I stayed late in the OR observation deck, watching Dr. Wallace perform a high-profile surgery. He moved with precision and authority, every command sharp and confident. The staff obeyed instantly. Watching him, I understood why people admired him, and why they feared him. He was power personified. But what struck me most was not his skill. It was his lack of empathy. He treated everyone around him as extensions of his own ego. Every success was his alone. Every mistake belonged to others. I promised myself I would become his opposite, skilled but kind, confident but humble. The following weeks, I buried myself in work. I took extra night shifts, volunteered for difficult cases, and spent hours perfecting surgical techniques. I even joined a speech therapist to control my stammer under stress. Slowly, I improved. I was not fluent, but I was more in control. Dr. Wallace still avoided assigning me lead surgeries in major cases. "You are technically good," he once said, "but you are not leadership material. Patients need to hear certainty in a surgeon's voice. You cannot give them that." I wanted to argue, but I stayed silent. Inside, I made a vow. One day, he would see what certainty truly meant. Over time, word spread among patients about the quiet doctor with gentle hands. Many of them specifically requested me, saying my calmness made them feel safe. Some nurses began to respect me more than the louder surgeons. Still, Wallace's shadow loomed over everything. No promotion, no recognition came my way. He monopolized the spotlight, and I accepted the darkness behind it. Until one day, fate decided to intervene in its own poetic way. It was a Friday morning when a call came from the health ministry. The minister himself was being admitted for an emergency cardiac condition, a complicated aneurysm. St. Patrick's was chosen for the procedure. Dr. Wallace, being the chief of surgery, was to lead the operation. The hospital buzzed with excitement. Reporters gathered, cameras waited, but destiny had a twist hidden beneath the surface, one that none of us could foresee, and one that would soon turn my humiliation into redemption. The morning of the minister's admission began like any other, yet something about the air felt heavier. The hospital corridors buzzed with an undercurrent of tension, the kind that only comes when power and politics step through sterile glass doors. Every department was on edge. Nurses whispered in corners. Administrative officers double-checked files. Even the janitors moved faster than usual. I stood near the nurses' station, reviewing post-surgical notes, when the elevator doors opened, and a group of security officers in black suits stepped out, their earpieces glinting under fluorescent lights. Behind them came a man in his 60s, short, with a dignified presence despite the oxygen tube resting beneath his nose. The health minister, Mr. Richard Hamilton. Dr. Wallace greeted him personally, his face wearing the perfect smile of false humility. "It is an honor to have you here, Minister," he said, shaking his hand. "You are in the best hands." I watched from a distance, unnoticed as usual. But what caught my attention was the minister's voice. Soft, slightly weak, but polite. He thanked Dr. Wallace and asked about the surgical team. "We will have the best of St. Patrick's on your case," Wallace assured him. "I will lead the surgery myself. You have nothing to worry about." The minister nodded, then glanced briefly around the room. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. Calm, curious, almost searching. Then he was wheeled away for further evaluation. Later that day, a pre-operative meeting was called. The conference room was filled with consultants, residents, anesthesiologists, and nurses. Dr. Wallace took the lead as always, commanding the discussion with his booming voice and immaculate confidence. Charts were reviewed, scans displayed, surgical steps discussed. When he asked for assistance assignments, I sat quietly, taking notes. I had no expectation of being included in something of this scale. But then, in a surprising turn, Wallace looked at me. "Dr. Cole," he said, his tone sharp, "you will assist in preoperative stabilization. I want you to manage the patient's echocardiography and ensure all parameters are ready before the anesthesia team takes over. Do not interfere beyond that. Understood?" I nodded. "Understood, sir." He gave a slight smirk, as if satisfied that I knew my place. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation. I barely slept. The minister's condition was delicate, an ascending aortic aneurysm dangerously close to rupture. His vitals fluctuated, and every small decision could tip the balance. I monitored him closely, documenting every rhythm, every fluctuation, every sound that the echo revealed. To my surprise, he was remarkably humble despite his status. During one of the night shifts, when most of the staff had left, I found him awake, looking at the ceiling. I greeted him softly and asked if he needed anything. He smiled faintly. "You are the young doctor who stammers, right?" My heart froze for a moment. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Yes, sir. That is correct." He chuckled gently. "Do not be embarrassed. I had a speech impediment too when I was a boy. My teacher told me I would never make a public speaker. Life has a strange sense of irony." For the first time, I smiled genuinely. "It does indeed, sir." He looked thoughtful. "Confidence is not in how you sound, doctor. It is in what you stand for." Those words stayed with me long after I left his room. 2 days later, the surgery was scheduled. The media was informed that the country's health minister would undergo a high-risk operation at St. Patrick's under the leadership of the renowned Dr. Wallace. Every hallway echoed with his name. Posters of him performing medical outreach were even displayed in the hospital lobby, as if to remind everyone who the hero was. I arrived early in the OR, ensuring every instrument was ready, every monitor calibrated. I double-checked the bypass machine, reviewed the cardiac imaging again, and prepared the room for precision. This was not my surgery, but I treated it as if it were my own. Dr. Wallace entered 15 minutes before the procedure, wearing his signature blue surgical cap embroidered with his initials, AW. His posture exuded command. He walked around, inspecting, correcting, and commenting on even the smallest things. "Dr. Cole," he said, looking at the monitor I was adjusting. "Try not to freeze up during the operation. We cannot afford any hesitation today." A few nurses looked uncomfortable. Chris, who was also part of the team, shot me an apologetic glance. I simply nodded. "Understood, sir." As the surgery began, the tension in the room thickened. The heart was opened under perfect control, and Wallace led the procedure flawlessly for the first few hours. But as he worked on the graft placement, an unexpected complication arose: a sudden drop in blood pressure, irregular rhythm, and rising central venous pressure. Something was wrong. The room became a storm of beeping machines and rapid commands. Wallace barked orders, his composure faltering. "More suction, increase perfusion, check for leak." I quickly scanned the monitors. "There is fluid accumulation near the left atrium," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. Wallace ignored me. "No, it is air embolism. Increase the flow." But I knew what I had seen. I spoke again, louder this time. "It is not air, sir. The graft has slipped at the proximal anastomosis. We are losing blood internally." He glared at me. "Do not contradict me, Dr. Cole." But the patient's vitals kept crashing. Time slowed. Everyone looked at Wallace, uncertain. My instincts screamed at me to act. I took the suction device and pointed to the area under suspicion. "Right there, sir. Clamp it now." Wallace hesitated, but Chris supported me. "He is right. Pressure is dropping fast." Finally, Wallace relented and clamped the area. The suction revealed a pool of dark arterial blood. The graft had indeed slipped. I guided the reattachment process carefully while Wallace tried to regain control of the situation. Within minutes, the bleeding stopped, and the vitals stabilized. The surgery continued for 3 more hours without further incident. When it was over, the patient was alive. Stable. Everyone exhaled in relief. But there was no acknowledgement, no thank you. Wallace simply walked out, exhausted and silent. Later in the doctor's lounge, I overheard him speaking to an administrator. "There was a minor complication, but we managed. Everything went as planned." He paused. Dr. Cole panicked a bit, but it was under control. I stood at the doorway, invisible as always. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out at the city lights again. I felt the familiar ache of injustice. I had made the correct call. I had helped save a life. Yet once again, my voice was dismissed, as if it had no right to truth. Days passed. The minister recovered slowly. The press hailed Dr. Wallace as a hero. Photographs of him shaking the minister's hand were plastered across newspapers. I remained a footnote in hospital reports, unnamed, unseen. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was in the ICU, checking on another patient, when I received a call from the administrative office. The minister wanted to meet me personally. My hands froze around the clipboard. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. But the voice repeated it clearly. "The minister has requested specifically for Dr. Ethan Cole." I walked into his private recovery suite later that evening. He was sitting up, smiling warmly, his eyes brighter than before. "Dr. Cole," he said, extending his hand. "I have been waiting to thank you personally." I felt a wave of humility. "Sir, I was only part of the team. Dr. Wallace led the procedure." He shook his head. "I was conscious for a brief moment during surgery, you know. I heard the commotion. I remember your voice. You were the one who spotted the bleeding, were you not?" I hesitated, unsure what to say. Finally, I nodded. He smiled. "You saved my life, doctor. And you did it while being dismissed by someone who was supposed to lead you. That takes courage." I was speechless. He continued. "When I return to full health, I will ensure people know the truth. I am also due for a second corrective surgery in a few weeks, and I want you to perform it, personally." My heart nearly stopped. Me, sir? Yes. You. His smile deepened. Confidence is not about a smooth voice, Dr. Cole. It is about standing firm when others shake. I left his room that night with tears I could no longer hold back. For years, I had fought against a silent judgment that my stammer made me less capable, less deserving. But now, the man whose life I helped save wanted me to operate on him. Word of the minister's request spread like wildfire through the hospital. Whispers followed me everywhere. Some congratulated me quietly. Others looked surprised, even annoyed. Dr. Wallace, however, was furious. He confronted me in the surgeon's lounge the next morning. "Did you put him up to this?" he demanded. I shook my head. "No, sir. He requested me himself." His eyes narrowed. "Do not get too comfortable, Dr. Cole. The operating table is not a stage for pity. One mistake and you will never work again." I met his gaze for the first time without fear. "Then I will make sure I do not make one." That was the moment our silent war began. A battle of pride and integrity, soon to unfold before the eyes of everyone who had ever doubted me. The upcoming surgery would not only test my skill but expose every hidden truth behind St. Patrick's polished walls. And when it did, the echo of poetic justice would finally fill the halls that once held my silence. The day of the minister's second surgery arrived with a strange kind of stillness, the kind that hides storms beneath calm skies. The hospital was once again under intense scrutiny. Security officers patrolled every entrance. Reporters gathered outside with cameras, their lenses hungry for headlines. But this time, something was different. My name was on the schedule. Lead surgeon, Dr. Ethan Cole. When I saw it printed in black ink on the board outside the operating theater, a current of disbelief and pride surged through me. For years, I had been the quiet shadow behind others, the one whose voice faltered when the world demanded confidence. And now, the world was about to watch me lead. Dr. Wallace, of course, was livid. He stormed into the preparation area before the operation began, his expression carved from stone. His surgical cap was already on, his mask pulled down to reveal a clenched jaw. "This is absurd," he said, his voice low but venomous. "Do you realize the risk you are taking, Cole? This is the health minister, not some routine case. You will crumble under pressure, and when you do, it will not just be your reputation that dies. It will be your career." I stood still, adjusting my gloves with deliberate calm. The minister has made his decision. I will give him my best. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Your stammer will betray you the moment stress hits. Do you think the staff will trust your commands if you cannot even speak without stuttering?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "If they trust my skill, my voice will not matter." He scoffed and turned away, muttering something under his breath before leaving. I exhaled slowly, centering myself. I could feel my heart pounding, but beneath the anxiety was something stronger. Resolve. Inside the OR, the lights were blinding, the air cold and sterile. Machines hummed softly, waiting like silent witnesses. My team took their positions, Dr. Mia Henderson at anesthesia, Chris as first assistant, and 2 scrub nurses standing by. Every eye in the room held quiet expectation, maybe even doubt. When the patient was wheeled in, the room fell into complete focus. The minister, already sedated, looked peaceful. Before he drifted off, he had grasped my hand lightly and whispered, "Do not fear your voice, doctor. It carries truth." Those words echoed through me as the anesthesia took effect. The procedure was complicated, a corrective graft replacement to secure the previously repaired section of the aorta. It required absolute precision, delicate hands, and an unbroken chain of decisions under pressure. I had studied the scans for days, memorized every contour of the heart like a map etched into my mind. "Scalpel," I said softly. The nurse placed it in my hand. The first incision was clean, steady. I could feel my breathing synchronize with the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. For a while, everything moved smoothly. Step by step, the team followed my directions. I spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure my stammer did not control me. Then came the moment of truth, the graft alignment. One wrong movement could trigger uncontrollable bleeding. I leaned closer, my hands steady, my mind sharp. Clamp here, I instructed, pointing toward the proximal end. But suddenly, I heard the sound of the door opening. From the corner of my eye, I saw Dr. Wallace enter the OR, dressed in full scrubs, uninvited. His presence tightened the atmosphere instantly. "Observation only," he said, pretending neutrality. But his tone carried poison. I ignored him and continued. "Bypass flow 60%, I said. Prepare for reattachment." As I began to suture the graft, I could feel Wallace's eyes on me, cold, dissecting, waiting for a slip. The staff grew tense. My stammer threatened to surface, and for a second my tongue froze. "Pressure is—" I paused, the word catching. The silence that followed felt eternal. Wallace stepped forward slightly. "See?" he whispered, just loud enough for the others to hear. "He cannot lead under pressure." Something inside me ignited. I inhaled deeply, exhaled, and forced my voice forward. "Pressure is stable. Proceed with final tie." The words came slower than I wanted, but they came. And the moment they did, my confidence surged back like a pulse of electricity. I completed the final sutures, layer after layer, every knot perfectly secured. The monitor beeped rhythmically again, strong, steady. The graft held. The bleeding was minimal. The heart began to beat naturally. For a moment, the room was silent, stunned. The operation was a success. Dr. Wallace took a step forward, staring at the monitor as if refusing to believe it. "Impossible," he murmured. "You must have—" But before he could finish, the door opened again. 2 hospital administrators and a press liaison entered quietly. They had been allowed by the minister's team to observe the final phase through the viewing gallery. Cameras from the observation deck had recorded the entire procedure for medical documentation. Every decision, every command, every second of the operation. Dr. Wallace's face turned pale as he realized what that meant. The surgery was completed flawlessly. As the patient was transferred to recovery, I removed my gloves and stepped back, my hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. The entire room seemed to exhale with me. Chris patted my shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did it, Ethan. You really did it." But the true storm began after the surgery. The following morning, the hospital conference room was filled with officials, administrators, and reporters. The health minister had requested a short press briefing to thank the medical team. I had no idea I would be part of it. When I entered the room, the crowd fell into a hush. Cameras turned, flashes flickered. Dr. Wallace stood near the podium, his face arranged in a neutral mask. The minister, seated in a wheelchair but looking remarkably strong, smiled when he saw me. "Dr. Cole," he said warmly, motioning me closer. "Come stand beside me." I obeyed, still uncertain. He addressed the reporters first. "I owe my life to the extraordinary team at St. Patrick's," he began. "But most of all, I owe it to one man, a doctor whose courage and integrity restored my faith in medicine." He turned toward me. "Dr. Ethan Cole." The room erupted in applause. I felt my throat tighten, my hands cold. The minister continued. "I chose him personally for this operation because I saw in him not just skill, but humility and truth. During my first surgery, he saved me when others dismissed his warning. That truth is now verified through the surgical recording." He paused, letting the words sink in. Dr. Wallace's face drained of color. Murmurs spread like wildfire across the room. The administrators exchanged uneasy glances. The minister's voice grew firmer. "Leadership is not loudness. Confidence is not arrogance. And a stammer does not mean weakness. It means perseverance." The applause that followed was thunderous. I could feel tears sting my eyes, but I held them back. Wallace stood frozen, unable to respond as the minister publicly acknowledged the very truth he had denied for years. After the conference, an internal review was conducted. The video clearly showed how I had identified the complication during the first surgery, how Wallace had ignored my warning, and how I had ultimately saved the patient. It also recorded his condescending remarks in the OR. Within a week, the hospital board stripped him of his department head position. Officially, it was called administrative reassignment, but everyone knew it was the end of his reign. When I passed him in the corridor a few days later, he avoided my eyes. There was no confrontation, no apology, only silence. But in that silence, I felt something like closure. Soon after, I was offered the position of acting head of cardiothoracic surgery. It was surreal. The same corridors that once echoed with whispers of mockery now carried nods of respect. Nurses smiled when they saw me. Residents sought my guidance. My voice, once a source of ridicule, had become a symbol of endurance. On my first day as head, I stood before the surgical team, the same team that had witnessed both my humiliation and my redemption. I spoke slowly, clearly, letting every word carry the weight of the moment. "I will not promise perfection," I said. "I will promise compassion. Skill can be taught, but kindness must be chosen every day. Let us never mistake arrogance for confidence." There was quiet applause, sincere, not forced. I looked around and felt something I had not felt in years: peace. That evening, I visited the minister one last time before his discharge. He greeted me with a smile. "You see, doctor? Life speaks for those who are often silenced. You did not need to raise your voice. The truth did it for you." I thanked him, not just for his words, but for believing in me when few others did. As I left his room, I paused near the window overlooking the city. The sky was streaked with gold, the same light reflecting off the hospital's glass facade. I thought of my mother's words long ago. A doctor's heart should be bigger than his ego. Now I understood. True power lies not in flawless speech, but in unwavering purpose. That night, for the first time in years, I stood before a mirror and said aloud, without fear, "My name is Dr. Ethan Cole." My voice trembled slightly, but I did not care, because now it carried strength. In the weeks that followed the surgery, the rhythm of life at St. Patrick's slowly returned to normal, or at least it appeared to. Patients continued to come and go. The halls still echoed with hurried footsteps, and the sound of monitors still filled the air with their steady beeping. Yet beneath that routine hum, something profound had shifted. The once intimidating walls of the hospital felt softer now, less like fortresses of hierarchy and more like shelters for healing. People smiled more often when they saw me. Nurses who once hesitated to meet my eyes now greeted me with warmth and respect. Residents approached me not out of formality, but out of genuine curiosity. The change was not loud, but it was steady, like a gentle tide reclaiming the shore. Every day when I entered the operating theater, I felt a new kind of peace. I no longer carried the invisible weight of humiliation on my shoulders. My stammer was still there, yes, but it no longer embarrassed me. I had learned to see it as part of my voice, not a flaw that needed to be hidden. I spoke slowly, with intention, and those who listened did so with patience and sincerity. I remember one morning, about a month after the minister's recovery, a young intern named Sarah approached me timidly. She was nervous, her hands fidgeting with her notepad. "Dr. Cole," she said, "I just wanted to tell you that I used to be afraid to speak up during rounds. But after watching you, I realized that words do not have to be perfect to carry truth." Her honesty touched me deeply. I smiled at her and replied, "Thank you, Sarah. The only wrong voice is the one that chooses silence when it should speak." Moments like that reminded me why I had chosen this path in the first place. It was never about prestige or recognition. It was about the quiet act of saving lives, of easing pain, of restoring dignity, not only in others but also in oneself. Outside of work, life also began to bloom again. I started spending weekends by the Charles River, walking along the banks where I once stood in loneliness. The city felt brighter, more welcoming. I would watch the ripples in the water and think of how far I had come, from the timid boy who could barely say his own name without faltering, to the surgeon who had found his voice not through fluency, but through courage. One evening, I received a letter from the health minister. It was handwritten, in neat, deliberate strokes. "Dear Dr. Cole, I have spoken in Parliament about the importance of empathy in medicine, and I mentioned your name. The nation deserves to know that healing is not just a matter of hands, but of heart. You reminded me that strength is not measured in sound, but in integrity. Thank you. Richard Hamilton." I read that letter several times, each word sinking into me like a quiet affirmation from the universe. I framed it and placed it on my office wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of why humility will always outlast arrogance. In the months that followed, I was invited to speak at several medical conferences. The first time I stood on stage before hundreds of people, I could feel the old fear creeping up, the familiar tightening in my throat, the silent dread of faltering in front of strangers. But then I remembered that moment in the OR, the stillness, the focus, the rhythm of the heart that had trusted my hands. I took a deep breath and began my speech slowly. "My name is Dr. Ethan Cole," I said, "and I used to believe that my stammer made me unfit to lead." There was silence, not of judgment, but of attentiveness. "I have learned," I continued, "that confidence is not the absence of imperfection, but the courage to stand steady in spite of it. The world will try to measure you by how you sound, how you appear, how quickly you speak. But your true worth lies in how deeply you care, how steadfastly you act, and how humbly you walk your path." When I finished, the applause that followed was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was not about fame or admiration, it was about connection. In that moment, I realized that my voice, imperfect as it was, had finally reached others in the way it was always meant to. Meanwhile, Dr. Wallace quietly disappeared from St. Patrick's. He resigned under the guise of early retirement and relocated to another city. There were whispers of regret, rumors of remorse, but I never sought them. I did not need an apology anymore. I had long forgiven him, not for his sake, but for my own peace. Sometimes I would still see his reflection in my memory, the towering man who once mocked me, now reduced to a shadow in the story of my own becoming. I did not hate him. In some strange way, I was grateful. Without his cruelty, I might never have found the strength to rise above it. One afternoon, while reviewing patient files, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar, older, weary, but sincere. "Dr. Cole," the man said softly. "This is Alan Wallace." I was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. He continued, "I wanted to thank you. I watched the press conference again. I saw how you handled everything. You were better than I ever was, not just as a surgeon, but as a man. I hope one day you can forgive me." There was a pause. I finally said, "You do not need my forgiveness, Dr. Wallace. You need your own." He sighed, perhaps in understanding, and the line went quiet. That was the last time I ever heard from him. Years passed. My name began to appear in journals and hospital reports, not because of glory, but because of consistent care. I introduced new mentorship programs for young doctors, especially those who struggled with speech or confidence. I wanted them to know that medicine is not a contest of perfection, but a journey of empathy. There was one particular student who reminded me of myself, a young man named Daniel, soft-spoken, bright, but constantly anxious about his speech. He avoided answering questions during rounds, afraid of stumbling. One day after class, I asked him to stay back. "Daniel," I said gently, "do you know why the heart has 4 chambers?" He frowned, unsure if it was a trick question. "Because it needs to separate the blood flow properly?" I smiled. "That is the biological reason. But I think there is a symbolic one too. The heart has 4 chambers because it must carry more than one kind of strength: compassion, courage, patience, and humility. You already have all 4. You just have to believe it." His eyes welled up. In that moment, I saw a reflection of the young man I once was, trembling, uncertain, but filled with quiet potential. When I walked out of the classroom that day, I realized that my greatest victory was not performing a flawless surgery or gaining recognition. It was breaking a cycle, proving that gentleness could triumph in a world obsessed with dominance. Sometimes late at night, when the hospital was quiet and the only sound came from the rhythmic hum of machines, I would walk through the corridors and reflect on everything that had happened. The ghosts of my past humiliation no longer haunted me. They had become teachers, whispering lessons in the silence they once filled. The world will always have people like Dr. Wallace, those who confuse authority with superiority, who mistake kindness for weakness. But I had learned that their power fades quickly, while dignity endures. One evening, as the sun set over the river, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I found myself standing outside the hospital again, The same spot where years ago I had once stood broken after being mocked. The same wind brushed against my face, but this time it felt different. I closed my eyes and whispered quietly to the air, "I forgive you, old fear. You taught me strength." And in that silence, I felt free. From that day onward, I carried a quiet mission, to remind every young doctor that humanity must never be lost to pride. That even in a place ruled by science, empathy remains the purest form of healing. The voice that once trembled now guided others. The hands that once shook under judgment now held lives steady. And the man who was once mocked for his speech had become the very example of what it means to speak from the heart. True strength does not come from perfection or pride. It comes from humility, integrity, and the courage to stand firm when the world tries to silence your voice. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that every voice has worth, every struggle has purpose, and every fall can lead to a greater rise. Subscribe to Emergency Fables, where stories heal, teach, and inspire courage through compassion.